Welcome to the Spool podcast. Unwind with Dr. Nils Roemer, Dean of the Bass School at UT Dallas. Here is Dr. Nils Roemer and Scott Farber.
You know, in the 70s music, the age of diversity and experimentation in the 70s, political awareness, the Sex Pistols, these kind of groups came on, and it was a lot of political awareness. And then the Bee Gees turned the world upside down, also in the 70s, with the disco era. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
With disco now in particular, what interests me is on the one side, the kind of different style of music, from Sex Pistols to Bee Gees is a little bit of a journey between these two. But in other ways, I think they are liberating themselves from pre-existing norms. If you start with the Sex Pistols, obviously immensely defined against any norms or traditions, but also all the way down to them producing their records first by themselves. The first Sex Pistol records were produced, so to speak, at a home press.
Right.
The artwork was produced by them. And so there's a real self-assertion in terms of the whole creative process and the distribution, as well as the music, the defiance, the politics, the closing, all of that. Bee Gees obviously comes along with a slightly different style than Sid Vicious and other kind of punk bands of the time. But here too becomes really liberating to that time. It creates new social spaces, discos, where you're allowed to go dance, hang out, socialize, and be other ways together that probably you would have not been allowed. If I look at pictures from the 50s, from Germany, for example, where did people go? Where did, young men and women hang out? Well, there wasn't a lot of choice. They would hang out like at the corner of streets and kind of talk to each other, but they were not really ready-made social spaces. So I think all that music created also new environments, new spaces where one was able to hang out, have a good time.
Well, and you mentioned Germany, so that makes me wonder, music in today's world especially, but even back then in the 60s and 70s, people tour the world.
Oh, yeah.
People go see Michael Jackson in Japan. They don't even speak English. You know what I mean? But the music, somehow, the whole world is interested in the same music.
Really, Beatles are a great example since,
the British invasion.
The British invasion when they came here, but Beatles had their breakthrough concert actually in my hometown in Hamburg.
Right.
This is, where in lots of ways some of their early fame begins, and they are as much successful in Britain as they are in Europe, and then obviously as well as in the United States. Now, I think there's, a whole new age and a new social group and a new core really that's coming to the fore, which is the youth. And I think it dictates really the music, culture and also the industry more and more by its own desires. However appalled, traditional outlets are at the time when they are dealing with the Beatles or with Bob Dylan. Have you watched ever Bob Dylan interviews?
Oh, sure.
The early ones, they're hilarious because, those poor journalists, they're probably always saying, no, you interview him, because he was like such a challenge because he was not, complying with any norms. That you always see these, very respectable journalists who are just probably gotten the last assignment from interviewing, a politician, and then all of a sudden, unfortunately, they got the red card and said, oh, you go and interview Bob Dylan. And they said, whoa.
A little challenge.
Yeah, a little challenge.
So let me ask you, you brought up an interesting point about the Sex Pistols, pressing their own records, creating their own labels. How much have record labels that control these artists, how much have they were part of developing the industry, and maybe not for the good, maybe for the better, I don't know, but it maybe homogenize some of these artists a little bit because the label was in control.
Well, that's obviously Prince, the artist, this whole argument, right? How, industry forces every artist into succumbing to a particular version that is more readily commercialized. And there's probably a lot of truth to it. The only thing that I would say, we're the consumers.
Right.
So we, in lots of ways, we also vote by what we buy and what we listen to. And I think there's often this ready-made explanation that if it wouldn't be for the evil industry that is doing all of that, well, we're participating in that, and we have our own choices to make. And if we say, well, we don't like this music that sounds like, sorry, AI produced it. We want something different, something more original. Then these
Right.
days with our streaming services, any given day you can illustrate where your interests are.
Right. So there's always been music.
Always be music.
And we somehow gravitate to the 50s to say, man, it just changed the world, when they started the rock and roll
I would
and
say
everything.
it's 60s, but
Well, oh, okay. I get you plugged Hamburg. I'm going to say something about Chicago now.
right, good,
Plug
good,
my
good.
hometown.
Right.
No. Well, I say the 50s because that's when Little Richard and Elvis
Right.
came onto the scene. The 60s, I think, personally, I think the late 60s, early 70s was the best music. And of course there could be arguments. But my
some
point,
would argue with that. Maybe, but
but the music has been around for a long time.
right.
But my point is that the 50s is when it seemed to really take notice, where there was some discussion about it. Why then? I mean, in the 50s there was the music. I mean, the 40s there was music, all the way back. Why was it the 50s that all of a sudden people woke up and went, whoa, what's going on?
Again, tying back a little bit to our earlier conversations, arts, humanities, technology. Bob Dylan without radio is inconceivable. So the
Right.
young Dylan talks a great deal about how the better part of his evenings were spent on listening to radio, listening
Right.
to musical sounds
Right.
that were strange or foreign, but exciting, exhilarating to him. And so part of what facilitates these new musical movements is radio.
Right.
And that also allows the spread of this music
Right.
so rapidly around the world.
Well, even today, without radio play, without airplay, it's very difficult,
But this is like radio still as in turning into short
Right,
waves and
right,
the likes,
right, yeah,
so it's a
yeah.
little different. But I think technology had a big role in facilitating these musical changes so that these new bands and musicians could quickly find their audiences, which would have been probably far more challenging for them if they would have been limited to one urban environment.
Right. How do these artists affect us?
Well, I think there's all individuals that affect us in different ways. Some of them just really become for current generation the embodiment of some of their own feelings and their anguish. And if I go back to the music that was really important for me in the 1980s, Cure and all of that expressed a certain feeling of that generation, us at the time. And so I think articulating and making you aware of that was really important, and we did that through music.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Staying in the arts, dance. Dance is a very expressive.
You and me right now here, I see.
We're dancing.
We're
yeah.
dancing, okay.
So dance is a very physical
Right.
type of expression. Are these all different or are they all the same? Painting, music, dancing?
I think they're all speak to different sentiments or like sensitivities that we have. Some of us like to express ourselves through dance and movements, and that I think attracts some of our students. And they take our dance classes. It becomes a way for them to be themselves, in ways they find exciting, and also to experience themselves in different ways. Others want to be in our pep band.
Right.
And feel like that their own contribution, their own trumpet, as part of producing something large and beautiful. So very different processes. Some are more centered on the individual, some are more on the collective, experience and production.
Film is a very good way to tell a story. Storytelling seems to be becoming more important now to us. Talk to me about storytelling.
So storytelling, I think last time we talked about the beginning of art and the kind of cave drawings in the south of France, but there are lots of ways storytellers. What you see, these drawings of these animals, they're telling stories about animals, and so I think art has always served us to tell certain stories. But I think these days, as we're talking about data and sciences and all that, we often forget that the most compelling way how we are persuaded or convinced or moved is through stories.
Right,
It's really
right.
the stories that compel us to do different things. that we wouldn't have otherwise. It's a story that often gets told. Good anecdote. So let me share an anecdote. How does it go? Jacques Prévert, the French poet.
Mm-hmm.
So he at some point tells a story about how he walked by a blind individual sitting on the streets trying to collect money with a hat in front of him. And so he asked him, how does it go? And he said, well, it's terrible. I don't hear the coins. Nothing seemed to happen. And so apparently Jacques Prévert said, well, I can't help you much. I also don't have money, but let me rewrite your sign. 2 weeks later, he walks by again and asks again, how's it going? He said, splendid. I mean, so much more in my head every day. What did you write on my sign? He said, spring is coming, but I can't see it.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a very powerful story. And
Right,
that, I think,
right.
that anecdote gets often used as a way of illustrating the power of storytelling. But I think that really encapsulates why all of a sudden something that is put into a story engages us in far greater ways. And I think everything these days that comes our ways is trying to give us that wrapping of a story.
Right.
Of, university, we just talked about it,
right.
that was founded in an open field in 1961, and how it's now, there's a narrative to all of
Right.
that. And I think places respectively all of us into particular moments in that story, but also has the ability maybe therefore to suggest, if we go back to the story of the university and my school, that we're moving forward as we always have,
Right.
even though we're just turning 50.
One thing that's always interested me is how, when it comes to storytelling, the generations go by real quickly. In other words, 29% of Americans today can tell you where they were when JFK was shot.
Right.
So their stories are important because there's going to become a day, and not in too distant future, where nobody's going to be left that was there, that could tell you that story firsthand. And that's obviously rapidly happening with World War II veterans. I remember when they announced that the last World War I veteran passed away. And we're at that point now, with World War II veterans, we're getting, close to the end. But I noticed is we all want to tell our kids everything, and we record things now and everything. We couldn't get stories out of our families. I seem to get all my grandparents' stories after they passed away. They all lived till I was in my 20s. I didn't know to ask, and they sure didn't talk about it, and they were all immigrants. And they all came on, with no money, in steerage, and I never heard the stories directly from them. And it seems like World War II guys didn't tell their stories. Why is that?
Well, their experiences obviously were very different from ours. And I think that generation in particular had very painful experiences. But by the time, so to speak, we came around, things looked really up for them. Usually, the 50s, 60s coincided with social upward mobility, with new economic growth, with the first abilities to buy one's first house and all those other things. And so they were very protective, so to speak, of their children, and thought that it was in the interest of their respective children to keep all those memories away, because there was a strong sense that their lives would be dramatically different from whatever they had experienced. And so, yes, they most often, there's a reason that generation is called the silent generation. They're not the big talkers,
Right. Yeah. Well, but I found it too, though, it wasn't just the war veterans. It seemed like that whole era kept silent about everything. It's just kind of one of those things that I go, I wish I got those stories while they were still here and everything.
But swinging back to the other side, like to us today, like these days when I go and visit my mom, she has a couple of photos from when I was young, when my father was there, my sister, and each one of these photos has been around in the house for many, many years.
Right.
And they mark particular, moments in the history of, our family, and they all prompt particular stories. So there's really, like the house, the photos, they're all kind of little storytelling devices, and our mom uses them as a way of reminding her of all of that. Now, if you ask me, so tell me about your kids, I'm going to reach to my iPhone and say, which of the 4,000 photos do you want to see? So there's something also where the technology that we have now created to kind of remember every single moment actually also drowns us out and almost makes it harder for us to have photos
moment,
and then the moment,
Right.
all these kind of storytelling, unless obviously the technology helps us a little bit. So now it creates a little story. So it's like, I visited my hometown, Hamburg, over the years. And so my little phone prompts and creates these little videos for me, Hamburg over the years, and something like that. But it's a very different way of remembering things than, the whole photo archive of my childhood. It's one box, of some black and white and some this and that. And most of the photos I know, we've looked many times at them, very different.
Well, I found too that, like my kids, if I start talking about my past and things that I did in my life and everything, it's Dad, what time's the game? You know what I mean? It's hard to get them to really care. And I think people start caring when they're about 30. Then there's a bigger interest level.
It's funny, one of our sons, just freshman, and he took a class where one of the prompts was that they had to write something about the family history.
Right.
And then we all went scrambling because it's not that easy to bring a family history all of a sudden together.
Right.
So my wife was, on ancestors. I was talking to my mom, and we were all trying to get this together. And so all of a sudden, there's this story of the family that emerged that, none of us fully were aware of because all these bits and bobs came together. So I think there's sometimes moments that really, if you use them, he was very interested at that moment. I don't think he thinks as much about it now, but it's there,
Yeah. No, there is an interest. All right, let's move on to technology.
Technology it is.
Our cell phone, our laptops, shopping on Amazon.
You do that?
Well, not me, but a few family members do every day. Working from home. You don't have to leave your bedroom anymore to live a life.
There's that, okay.
No, but I'm saying, what is that good for society?
Well,
you literally don't have to leave your home.
So my short answer would be that I think there's a lot of loss with that as well. And I think we keenly felt that during the pandemic, that I think technology was at a point that allowed us actually to very quickly pivot into online teaching. And that, initially it was a great experience because it was a big challenge. We all kind of threw ourselves into it. But we, coming out of it, we increasingly realized that was not the same. It was not like our normal, and that we lost a lot of that community and that kind of being together. And I think now more than ever, if you look around on this campus or in our school, I'm all about learning environments and spaces, in-person learning environments and spaces.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really important. But I wondered because I do know people that spend most of their life at home now. They don't go out because they could shop online.
Right.
Everything became very easy. Was there a particular decade that you think where the boom really took place in technology?
Obviously, there's a sense that there was a lot of booming in the last 20 or 25 years.
Right.
There's really the sense that technology is now accelerating at a pace that we as a society have never experienced before. Now, to be sure, there were other technological advances that happened in the last 500 years that were significant. Book printing being one of them, maybe you could say, the printing of the first Bible in the 1450s was transformative to culture as much as maybe the iPhone was of sorts. But after the invention of the book printing, it's not that the next thing happened 5 years thereafter and then 2 years thereafter and so on and so forth. And I think technological change happens more rapidly than ever, but also their kind of absorption happens far more quickly than ever. One example that is often used, so after the invention of phones, it took about 75 years until you had 1 million phone users. After the creation of cars, it took 25 years until you had 1 million drivers of cars. ChatGPT accomplished that in 2 months.
Right.
So it's just incredible acceleration if you think about it. There's a sense, therefore, by some of these futurologists that say the changes that have occurred in the last 20 years are as much as, from a technological perspective, as the changes that have occurred in the last century.
Right.
And so in this pace, if anything, is constantly accelerating further and further.
You know, it's interesting to me how quickly things change now, and nobody gets excited about it. You know, when we were growing up, the next big thing was coming. We couldn't wait till it came on the market or it happened. You know, and my parents told me about getting that first TV, the anticipation, and they used to stand in front of the department stores, you know, to watch the TV. Now, you know, now when things happen, we just expect it. It's a very different. We're not looking forward to it. We just go, oh, really? They sent up another rocket, you know, to Mars? Oh, okay.
But, you know, you and I, you know, Walkman. Come on, that was the coolest thing when it came. And you know, it was like...
I still have one.
Well, me too. But, I mean, when the Walkman came, it was not just finally you could listen to music. You could, you know, be like listening to music while you were going to school.
Right.
Doing your school break. You could listen to it while you were on the train and so on and so forth. So, you know, you could listen with your first girlfriend, you know, the same music, and could be in your own bubble and whatever else. So I think there's technology that was that transformative. And I would say the first smartphones were like that. I mean, now we're on whatever, 9 or 10 or whatever, so we don't pay attention any longer as much. Right. But the first ones very much did that for us.